What's up, everybody? Good morning. Happy Wednesday. And we've got another collection of college football players to examine with their strong performances in the most recent week. And obviously, bye weeks are really biting into the selection of players that you have. Like a team like Georgia didn't play this week, so therefore you've got a lot fewer players to look at in the draftable section because a lot of players on Georgia are going to get drafted this year, but we try to find what we can. And we've got a lot of familiar faces here. We've also got a few new ones. Let's go into it and figure out who is boosting their draft stock at this very important juncture for pretty much all these players. So, quarterback. We're going to start with quarterbacks like we always do. And I got to lead with a guy who took the L on Saturday because even though they took the L, I mean, Cam Ward, he was back on track this week. 34 of 48, 438 yards against Oregon. And Oregon was mad. You know Oregon was mad. So Cam Ward did what he could. He threw for a touchdown, ran for 30 yards, 90.9, PFF grade. So Cam Ward did what he could. There just wasn't a lot to do, and he continues to be one of my favorite tier 2 quarterbacks in this year's upcoming draft. So good stuff there for sure, even though the team took a pretty bad loss. Let me zoom in here a little bit, actually. So yeah, Cam Ward was great. JJ McCarthy also had, I think, his best game of the year so far. I'm not a big JJ McCarthy fan as far as the NFL goes, but he's clearly a mid-round guy to me, at the very least. 21 of 27, 287 yards, 4 touchdowns against a bad team, but a rival team, I guess. 3 carries for 8 yards, 93.3 PFF grade, as good a grade as you're going to find for most weeks. Jordan Travis, I also thought had a very impressive game for Florida State. 27 of 36, 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 10 carries for 62 yards and a touchdown, 81.2 PFF. I'll just go ahead and call that out from the top since you guys can't necessarily see it. He obviously got bailed out a little bit by Duke losing their quarterback, and the pick six was bad. The interception was bad because that was very costly, but overall, I think he played a good game. Jaden Daniels could be here pretty much every week, but I got to shout this out right here. So Jaden Daniels has 11 completions in this game for 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a pretty insane ratio right there. You don't see that very often at any level of sports. 11 completions, 280 yards. Also ran for a touchdown, 70.1 PFF grade, which is actually one of his worst games of the year, which should give you an idea of how he's playing. And then you've got my favorite, my man, Joe Milton. Now, I'm not saying he played amazing, but I think he played really well against the Alabama Crimson Tide defense. The fumble sucked. Obviously, the fumble was a huge turning point in this game. But Milton, after a couple games where he was just kind of whatever, 28 of 41, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns, ran for 60, 77.2 PFF grade. He continues to be my favorite QB sleeper in this year's draft. And if he continues to play this inconsistently, as far as I'm concerned, all the better. Okay, so now we move along to tight end here. Not a ton going on in the tight end area this week. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a ton that I was excited about. But Cade Stover, I mean, he's always here. Cade Stover always grinds. 4 catches, 70 yards against Penn State. No pressures allowed as a blocker. Not that he does a lot of pass blocking. And a 69.5 PFF grade. So Cade Stover continues to just grind out this really nice season. Pretty much every week he's making positive contributions to Ohio State. Love him. Bryson Nesbitt for UNC. He showed up one of his best games of the year. 3 catches, 93 yards and a touchdown. UNC ran the ball really effectively against Virginia. They didn't win, obviously. Kind of embarrassing. But Bryson Nesbitt did his thing. No pressures allowed by him on May. May did get sacked a couple times. 68.6 PFF grade. So Nesbitt trying to reclaim some of his former draft status because it is starting to fade away. I think if you take a look at recent mocks, teams are starting to lose interest in him. So he's got some work to do. Jaheim Bell of Florida State had a productive day, 8 catches, only 53 yards, but he was routinely involved as a first down conversion receiver. 152 rushing yards for Florida State as well. No pressures allowed on Jordan Travis. Only a 57.3 PFF grade, but I think he played probably one of his best games of the year. Now, that's not saying much because he's been a disappointment this year, but I like what I see from Jaheim Bell overall. Trey Knox of SC had 5 catches for 32 yards from Spencer Rattler, 56.2 PFF grade. I mean, this kind of tells you how this week went for tight ends. There wasn't a lot to say. I've got to squeeze somebody in like Trey Knox. And honestly, you could unfortunately say the same about Caden Prescorn of Mississippi, who did have a pretty good game. He had 2 catches for 63 yards, so he made some big plays, but it's not super substantial. 68.1 PFF grade. I mean, it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. But it wasn't a great week for tight ends. Obviously, we've lost our, shining star in Brock Bowers, and he wouldn't have played this week anyway. But the tight end class is, I don't know, it's dicey, right? There's not as much as we were hoping, I think. Okay, so interior offensive line now. We've got Christian Mahogany of Boston College. He's often around here because Boston College is such a good running team, and he's the lead offensive lineman there. 308 rushing yards for BC, 7.2 yards a carry. No pressures allowed on Castellanos. Very clean game from Mahogany, 60.6 PFF grade. I don't know why it's so low, but it is what it is. He's a mid-level interior offensive lineman who I like a lot. New name. Got a new name here, Christian Haynes of the University of Connecticut, the Connecticut Huskies. He's getting mid-round hype, like 4th-round pick hype. Small school, but he's starting to get some real credibility among NFL scouts. UConn, this was actually one of his worst games, and it was still solid. 193 rushing yards by the Huskies. Obviously, they're a bad team, but they run the ball well. Haynes didn't allow any pressures on Roberson. PFF grade of 63.9 was actually one of his lowest scores of the year. He's typically much better, but he's become a really interesting mid-round prospect, I think. Graham Barton of Duke. You guys got to remember when you're talking about Graham Barton, because he didn't have his best game, he's dealing with his backup quarterback for most of this game. And when Riley Leonard is in, he's clearly not himself. He's not playing healthy. He's not healthy, and that kind of stuff makes Graham Barton's job all the harder. So I'm not going to judge him super hard based on this game. Almost 200 rushing yards still, 5.6 yards a carry. Barton allowed 1 pressure, and I think he had 1 penalty as well. 64.1 PFF grade is just okay, but I think you have to grade it on a curve a little bit here. Javion Cohen of Miami. Miami ran the ball effectively on that really good Clemson defense. 5.6 yards a carry, over 210 yards. Cohen allowed 1 pressure, but overall I think played fairly cleanly. 60 PFF grade. So I still like what I see from Javion Cohen as a guard. And then you've got Zach Frazier of West Virginia. He had a good game. 226 rushing yards for the Mountaineers, 5.1 yards a carry. He allowed 2 pressures. No sacks, though. The sack allowed was not on him, on Green. And his PFF grade was actually pretty decent, 68.7. So it wasn't a great week for the interior linemen. Like Hooper Bebe did not have a particularly strong performance for Kansas State. It was kind of hard to find guys. So this interior offensive line class also, I don't know, I'm a little disappointed in it. Not as disappointed as I am in the tight ends, but somebody in this interior offensive line group needs to kind of establish themselves a little bit beyond what we've seen so far, I think. I really would like to see somebody, a few guys just emerge as the dominant interior offensive lineman. Like, I still love Bebe, even though he didn't play great this week, but we need more guys here. Okay, going on to the defense now, and we got some really nice performances this week from a few guys. Leading off is Jerzan Newton. My God. So, Illinois defensive lineman. He's probably the number 1 defensive lineman at this point. 6 tackles, including 1 for a loss, which was a sack. 8 QB pressures. PFF grade of 95. I don't know if I've ever seen a PFF grade that high. That's as good as it gets, pretty much. 95 PFF grade. Off the charts. I don't know what to say other than that. Just an absolutely incredible performance by Newton, and he continues to solidify himself as a guy who, not only is he probably the best defensive lineman in this class, but he is probably going to go too high for the Seahawks to even consider getting him. Justin Igbogbe of Alabama had another really nice game. 8 tackles, 1.5 for loss. He had a QB pressure. Alabama stuffed the run okay. A lot of yards, but only 3.5 yards a carry. 66.9 PFF grade. So he's still like a day 3 guy, and I would love to get a guy like Ibogbe in the day 3 area. He could be another one of those low-key Alabama linemen that ends up being a good pro. Tyler Davis, nothing over the top crazy for Clemson this week. 5 tackles, 1 for loss, 74.2 PFF grade. Just an all-around solid, decent game from Tyler Davis. Leonard Taylor III, he shows up here. He's been absent a lot this year, but we finally got a big game from him, relatively speaking, for the Hurricanes. 5 tackles, 2 for loss, 4 QB pressures. Miami allowed all of 31 rushing yards against Clemson, 0.8 yards a carry, and Taylor's PFF score was 87.4. So there are some games where it feels like he doesn't have a big impact, but he's consistently scoring very well with this PFF scoring system. I'll say that. So he's still probably a first-round guy, still lingering around. I like him a lot. And he's, I think, one of the top candidates to end up a Seahawk. Fabian Lovett of FSU is my final defensive lineman. We've got 4 tackles, including 2 for a loss, 1 QB pressure. Florida State only allowed 273 yards. Obviously, Duke was crippled because they didn't have their healthy quarterback, but still a good game, 71.8 PFF grade. So Fabian Lovett slowly creeping up as like a day 3 guy that could edge into day 2 potentially. Somebody to keep in mind as we move towards the end of the season. So I liked what I saw from defensive linemen this week overall, I gotta say. Linebacker. All right, linebacker. Some interesting stuff here. Jalen Ford, I'm going to lead with for Texas. Texas gutted out a close win, and Jalen Ford was one of their key contributors on defense. 6 tackles, 2.5 for loss, including a sack. 2 QB pressures. Texas, you couldn't run on them in this game. They allowed 14 rushing yards, 0.7 yards a carry. Really dominant stuff. By the way, shout out to Tavondre Sweat, who did not make the cut this week, but obviously had to play really well for Texas's opponent to only have 14 rushing yards. 66 coverage yards, so we got dotted up a little bit in terms of what he allowed in coverage, but 70.3 PFF grade overall, still quite good. I still like Jalen Ford as a day 3 guy. We also got Tommy Eichenberg for OSU in a tough, hard-fought win against Penn State. 8 tackles, half a tackle for loss. Ohio State allowed less than 50 rushing yards and less than 2 yards a carry, 240 yards total, only 12 points. His PFF grade was not exactly strong, 56.8, but I think Tommy Eichenberg is rounding into shape here. It took him a while. That first month was not particularly impressive for me. So Tommy Eichenberg, he's making his way back up. I don't think he's a first rounder or anywhere near close anymore, but he's rounding into form. Cedric Gray of UNC went off. I know UNC lost, but he did everything he could. 18 tackles, including 1.5 tackles for loss. He had a QB pressure. He did get dotted up in coverage. 8 completions for 68 yards. They picked on him in coverage a little bit, which is troublesome. And it's a big reason why his PFF grade got docked to 63.6. But I overall continue to be very impressed by what Cedric Gray can do. Maybe the best performance at linebacker this week, however, probably goes to Junior Colson of the Michigan Wolverines. He was awesome. 11 tackles and a pressure, 38 coverage yards allowed. Michigan only allowed 49 rushing yards, 1.7 yards per carry, only 182 total yards, 0 points, and Colson had an 82.1 PFF grade. So one of the best players at his position in college football this week for sure. And he continues to be a guy who I think may very well rise and take some of the draft status that was originally going to guys like Carter and Trotter and Eichenberg. Speaking of Trotter, though, he actually had a good week, even though Clemson did lose. 11 tackles, 2 for a loss, 2 passes defense, 2 pass breakups, or whatever you want to call them, and 18 coverage yards allowed, which is really good for him because he's been a problem in coverage so far this year. 71.9 PFF grade, excuse me. Very strong. So those are your linebackers for the week. Pretty good play from them. And we've got one position left in safety. Now, real quick before I get into the players here, I do want to say that I think that we are kind of at a point now where thinking about safety in this upcoming draft class is very questionable. I still think that it's within the realm of possibility the team takes a guy to take over for Adams or Diggs in 2025. But with Jarek Reed in tow, and then you have Julian Love, it's certainly less likely now. So you could make a pretty good argument that this safety stuff is just not really going to play out this offseason. Nevertheless, I do want to call out some guys who played really well this week. Cameron Kinchins, who is one of the top safeties in this class anyway, for the Hurricanes, had maybe his best week of the season. He had 6 tackles and a pick, only allowed 14 yards in coverage in a big win for Miami, 82.2 on PFF. Tyler Nubbin of Minnesota continues to impress me. 4 tackles, including 1 for a loss, a sack, a QB pressure, which was the sack, a pass breakup, a fumble recovery. Minnesota only allowed 127 yards and 10 points against Iowa. Now it's Iowa, but Nubbin still did great. 82 PFF grade. Very impressed with him. Kalen Bullock of USC had 4 tackles and a pick that he took back for a 30-yard touchdown. And he continues to be really good in coverage. He didn't allow a single completion in coverage in this game. So he is he's continually one of the best coverage safeties in the league, or nation, country, however you want to put it. It is too bad that USC continues to, well, it's not too bad for me, but it's too bad for him that USC continues to drop games and not look so good this year. Josh Proctor of Ohio State, I think I mentioned him once before, but he had a nice game for the Buckeyes. 4 tackles, including 1 for a loss, a QB pressure, 2 pass breakups, 33 coverage yards, 240 total yards allowed, and 12 points. You guys know how good Ohio State's defense was against Penn State this weekend. 65.1 PFF grade. Just a solid, decent game from a guy who's probably going to be a day 3 pick. Finally, we have Cole Bishop of Utah. He came in with 3 tackles and a pass breakup, a fumble recovery, only allowed 23 yards in coverage, and a 70.2 PFF grade as Utah gets that big win. And that's all I got this week. So some really nice performances at certain positions here. I like what I see from QB. I like what I see from the defensive line and linebacker and safety. I just wish there was a little more going on at tight end and offensive line. Just wish we had a little more depth at those positions in the draft, because come draft day, the Seahawks may end up needing it. All right, I'll see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think down below. Pretty good crop of college football play this week.